Okay, so welcome to the Division of Adult Education monthly webinar for November 20th, 2025. This session is being recorded. By participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of this session. No other recording of this session is allowed. That includes any kind of AI note-taking. So if you have that, please turn that off. Okay, and I see a note from someone who actually tried logging onto or who logged on to this call twice and had to complete the CAPTCHA each time. So it appears that that will be what you'll have to do moving forward. Okay. Today's agenda. Last month, Chrissy Klinger was scheduled to present on the PA Foundation skills, but I took up too much time talking about data, so Chrissy will be doing her presentation today. I'll do a brief reminder of the context for her presentation, and then she'll do her presentation. The rest of the meeting is really just a couple of reviews. I'm going to review measurable skill gains and the different ways students can achieve measurable skill gain, quick review of policy G100 and a reminder of where you can find it so that you can review it. A couple reminders about the data awareness campaign, an update about DiplomaSender, and a brief, not really update, but some information regarding SNAP and the new work requirements. So under WIOA, we have, there are 6 outcomes that each of the core programs has to meet, or we have to report on, right? And for each core program, there are 3 employment-related outcomes. There is employment in the second quarter after exit from the program, the median wage for those people who are employed in the second quarter after exit, and employment in the fourth quarter after exit. I will remind everyone that you'll want to mute yourselves. It sounds like somebody's unmuted and we're hearing a little bit of background noise. In addition, there is the statewide, which is not on this slide, there's the statewide effectiveness in serving employers outcome, which like each state, all the core programs have a single report. So they take all of our participants in a single cohort and we report on that. But that is actually defined as retention in the same employer from the second to fourth quarter after exit. So there's actually a 4th employment-related outcome under WIOA, but we as adult ed don't have our own target for that. We're just part of the overall state. But Title II, just like all the other titles, we have to report our own outcomes for these 3 employment outcomes. As I think I've reported multiple times, back in July, states were informed by OCTAE that beginning with the October 25 reporting that we did into the NRS, we would be assessed, is the word that they use. We would be assessed on our measurable skill gain outcome and on the outcome for employment in the second quarter after exit. And what the assessed means is that we're actually being held accountable for meeting the target for the first time. So up until now, we've had to report, we've had outcomes, we've had targets, but if we didn't meet the target, there weren't any consequences yet. They were not imposing the technical assistance and the potential sanctions on all of that on Title II. The other titles were already dealing with that for the majority of their outcomes. So beginning October 2025, they're going to take what we reported to them and kind of compare it to our targets, apply the statistical adjustment model, and determine whether or not we have met our targets. And one of these employment outcomes we're being held accountable for now, and that is the employment in the second quarter after exit. We don't know if they're going to be adding the additional ones next year or not. I'm sure it will be added at some point in the near future. If it's not next year, it will probably be the year after. So we want to start having conversations around like what can adult ed do? What can our programs do to try and support the state's ability to meet our employment targets? And that is especially important because it's frustrating, right? I understand this. We have this conversation at the national level. We are an education program. Title II is adult education and family literacy. It is not a job development program. It is not a job placement program. Those are actually not activities that you are allowed to do with our grant funds. You can't hire a job placement person and pay them with our grant funds. You can't use our grant funds to send people out and develop relationships with employers so that they will employ our students. That's not something you're allowed to do with our funds. You may have other funds that you use to support staff who do that, and that's fine. They may help our students, but that's not something you can do with our grant funds. So that is kind of a frustration nationally amongst adult education state directors. We discuss about how having these employment targets doesn't seem appropriate, given that we can't actively place people in employment with our grant funds. But it is what it is, right? It's in the statute. Octave can't change it. So what can we do? What can you do as programs to potentially impact employment, especially since it's employment after exit? So, really, we're education programs, so you're going to integrate workforce preparation activities into instruction. So as you're teaching students, you're helping them develop the skills to either gain employment or retain the employment that they have and move up in employment if that's what they're interested in, right? We've also recognized that not everyone in our programs is looking for employment. So, as a reminder, workforce preparation activities, a lot of people tend to think of that as like writing resumes and doing job interviews. That's not what workforce preparation activities are, right? Workforce preparation activities are activities that are designed to help students acquire a combination of basic academic, critical thinking, digital literacy, and self-management skills, including competencies in utilizing resources, using information, working with others, understanding systems, and obtaining the skills necessary for successful transition into and completion of post-secondary education, training, or employment, right? So it's those, what we call in the PA Foundation skills, the transferable skills and the digital literacy skills. So what, programs need to integrate activities that support development of those skills so that when students want to get employment, whether they're in our program or after they exit, they have the skills to be able to do the jobs. And I mentioned the PA Foundation skills, which Chrissy will be providing more information on shortly. The other thing that programs can do to support students and support employment is the transition student support. And I know programs, you have student support specialists. There's a lot of effort put into barriers and helping them attend classes, but also having your student support specialists help students identify their skills, their interests, help them understand what a potential career pathway looks like, help them understand what employment in particular sectors looks like, understand how what they're learning in their adult education program will be useful in employment, what it takes to be employed, all those kind of things, and then helping the students plan for what the next steps are. And, that's what transition support does. And in doing that, your programs are providing some of the career services that you're required to provide with Title II funds. You know, one of the career services is initial assessment of skills, which can include assessment of student aptitudes and abilities beyond just, giving the CASAS or the TABE or the BEST. It's not just the basic skills assessment to place them in an educational functioning level, but over the course of their participation in your program, your transition support specialists, whatever you call your student support specialists, can be helping students assess, what do they really enjoy doing? Do they have hobbies or interests that might translate into employment, things like that. Another career service is providing information on providers of education training and workforce services that your students can access. And another career service is referrals to and coordination of activities with other programs and services, including collaboration with your workforce development system partners, right? So while we don't do job placement, we don't do job development, we're not out there connecting with businesses. Your local PA Career Link and local board, actually, I don't know if your PA Career Link has it, but your local board has a business services team, connecting with your local PA Career Link, helping students understand what's available to them through the PA Career Link, can help with employment as well. And, I understand that different local PA Career Links demonstrate different levels of receptiveness in working with the students that come in our program, but that is key to helping our students get the employment and helping us as a state meet the employment targets. So that's a little bit of context, background, explanation of like, why am I suddenly focusing on employment when I haven't talked about it a whole lot before. And now I am going to mute myself and allow Chrissy to start talking, do her presentation on the PA Foundation skills.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I am Chrissy Klinger. I oversee 2 PDS projects, the Workforce Development System Liaison Project and the Integrated Education Training Projects. As Amanda said, today I'll be focusing on talking about the transferable skills, which are part of the workforce preparation skills and PA Foundation skills. So I'm just going to go over a few things today and then really encourage programs to reach out to our project to talk more in depth about how we can support some of this work with your learners that you have coming into your program. Next slide, please. So in the chat is a link to where you can find the PA Foundation skills on the Pennsylvania Adult Education Resources website, the PAIR website. And if you haven't been on this section of the website recently, we have updated it to make it hopefully more user-friendly to access materials. We've also added some new tools and resources. So as you can see on the screen, the dark blue and light blue skills are under a gray umbrella of workforce preparation skills. So we have 4 digital literacy skills under there, and then we have 7 transferable skills. And all of these skills are the same skills in the same wording that you would see them listed in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. So today we're going to talk about how to help adult learners increase competency in the transferable skills to support them in transition to or to be successful through post-secondary education and training and/or employment. So again, a reminder, if you want to see the full list of all these skills, you can go to the PAIR website and access the full list. The full checklist for all of these skills is for instructors and adult education staff. It is not in student-friendly language. However, we do have some other tools and resources that have been created that are in student-friendly language to be used with learners. Next slide, please. So we're just going to take a look at one skill right now just to understand how the checklists are organized. So here you will see the number 5, working with others. Again, there's 7 skills They're not in any particular order, so it doesn't mean that if it's numbered 1, it's the most important, or you have to go over that skill first with learners. Again, these are just how they're listed in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, so we put that in the same order. We're using numbers just to help you as far as lesson planning and documenting on your lesson plans which skills you're focusing on. So for this particular skill of working with others, it has several competencies. I'm just going to highlight one of those competencies today. So the first competency under that skill is works effectively in teams. And so that one is labeled 5.1. And then you'll see to the right of that are indicators. These are behaviors that you can observe or an employer could observe a person doing that would show competency in that skill. So there you can see a few indicators in each skill, and each competency has a different number of indicators. Next slide, please. So if we take that competency of 5.1, works effectively in teams, we can look at some activities that an adult learner might do in their work life, their home life, or school that would show possible competency or indicate that they are progressing with that transferable skill. So for example, with work, a learner may need to get along with other team members, solve problems together. There may be a shared goal of reducing safety incidences over 1 month. And so again, they would be working together on that. In life, maybe as a parent, they're going to work effectively with their family members. So as a parent with their children, working to maybe make dinner together and clean up and split up responsibilities. And then when looking at school being possibly our adult education programs, or when they are ready to transition and possibly doing additional education and post-secondary, that might look like working with another classmate to complete a project. So an example might be maybe they're comparing 2 different loan options for a car, and they have to determine which loan option is better and why. And so they're having to listen to differing opinions and reasoning. It's involving math skills, it's involving reading skills, and also other transferable skills like problem solving as well. On the PAIR website, sorry, Amanda, could go back one more slide. There is multiple resources for learners to look at these transferable skills. So what we want to make sure we're doing is helping adults reflect and think about how they are using these transferable skills. So we do have a self-reflection where they can answer some questions, and that helps them realize where their strengths might be with the transferable skills or some skills that they might want extra opportunities to work on. And so the second link in the chat should take you to the specific page that has the self-assessment. So there's 3 tabs, and in the first tab, there will be the self-assessment. There is also a help sheet. So that could be used with adult learners. Again, a little bit more friendly language of the transferable skills and an opportunity for learners to document how they're using this. So again, this is a tool they can use while they're in the program, but they can continue to use that tool as they leave your program and continue in their work life. So, as Amanda mentioned, maybe they're coming to your program to get the basic skills they need for an entry-level position, but then they may go on and build skills and want to move to a new position within the career pathway. So having this tool to take with them and to be continuously aware of the transferable skills that they need to progress to continue to do well in the workforce could be really helpful to them. I also want to mention that we did field test these documents. I want to thank both Lehigh Carbon Community College and Reading Area Community College and letting us come into classrooms and working with English language learners, ABE learners, and piloting a lot of these tools. So they have been field tested and have worked really well. And we've gotten amazing feedback from adult learners in the field about using these tools and the information that they can learn about themselves through the use of these tools. All right, next slide. So what might this look like in the classroom? So just highlighting a few of the skills. When we think about self-management, making sure that your attendance procedures mirror workforce procedures and explaining to learners that the reason you have attendance policies organized this way is to help mimic what they might see in the workforce. Utilizing resources, you may have students practice that skill by having to do some pre-lesson activities or bringing materials or ideas to the classroom for a lesson. Critical thinking is really important when you're doing integrated lessons, so bringing in a lot of different contextual and real life materials, authentic materials, activities to really pull a lot of different things together. So like we gave that example of a car loan, being able to pull different academic and transferable skills and even digital literacy skills as well. So maybe they're looking at loan calculators that are available on the internet. And then using information, that might be a skill that they could practice with exit tickets or at the conclusion of lessons. And again, wanting to make sure that you're giving space and time for the students to really process and be aware of how they're using these skills, not necessarily the teacher having to say to them, okay, everyone, you're using this skill. So maybe it needs to start that way where the teacher's pointing it out, but hopefully over time, the learners are starting to be more aware and they're starting to recognize when they're using different skills for different activities. And finally, example of transition skills. So these might be involving activities outside of the lesson. So maybe they've done something in the classroom and you're asking them to extend that learning outside of the classroom, whether that's in an activity or doing something through their distance learning. If you are wanting support with this, we do have student support coordinator open office hours, but anyone can come to those open office hours. So if you would like the link to that, I'll put my email in the chat and you can reach out and we can get you the link to those open office hours, or if you need to share that with staff that maybe may not be on this webinar so that they can get direct support with that. And we can schedule other times if the open office hours do not work. Next slide, please. So we've talked about how you might encourage adult learners to think about transferable skills and apply transferable skills in the classroom, but that's not the only place that these skills can be practiced. Again, they're transferable, so they're used in many aspects of their lives. And so one of the ways that we can help them in building their competencies, again, to enter employment, retain employment, or move along within their career pathway, or access post-secondary education and training, is we want to start with guiding them through career awareness, career exploration, and career planning. So part of transition skills would be, helping them with goal setting. So one of those things that maybe that could look like outside of the classroom with a student support coordinator is going on to ONET online and exploring an occupation, looking at the different skills and making that connection to what skills are listed for that occupation that are transferable skills. And again, using those self-reflection documents to identify where there's strengths and where they will still need support, and kind of building those into their SMART goals that they're setting for the program. Another way that learners might use this outside of the classroom is possibly working on activities in small groups. So maybe there's some things that your student support coordinator can lead outside of the classroom, or even within the classroom collaboratively with the teacher, and give opportunity to, again, practice things on their own and know where they can get support if they get stuck. So whether that's with the student support coordinator or another program staff partner, as Amanda mentioned, if you're working with Title I, maybe the learner can, do some activities through Title I. Maybe there's some workshops that, again, help them practice these transferable skills. When it gets to the skill of self-management, be thinking about how your program is setting up things to be learner-centered and taking those approaches with your learners, and thinking about how to model and guide learners in self-managing and doing things on their own. So again, maybe they need to access a new resource and they're really nervous about that. So maybe they're working one-on-one with their student support coordinator to walk through questions they need to ask or the steps they need to take. And so they're getting some help, but then they're going to go ahead and try to do that on their own and then come back and again report how that goes with the student support coordinator. Or if they do get stuck, then maybe the student support coordinator, works side by side with them to finish that task. And finally, when we're looking at locating and using resources, all of our adult learners do come to our programs with assets and strengths. So making sure to recognize what strengths and assets they already have and how to use those to build upon and continue to progress with other transferable skills. And just a reminder that, some of our workforce partners might be able to connect learners to employment and also offer support during employment for the first few months. So, as we said, we can only do so much while they're in our program, but we're part of outcomes that happen after us. So being able to give them tools, being able to talk with partners, and any way that we can give them support those first few months that they are taking a job for the first time, really talking with partners and thinking about what that could look like. And we want to make sure, again, that we're giving them tools that they can use when we're not with them anymore. Some other things to know is we have some videos on using Career One Stop, ONET, and Skill Up PA. So again, if you're wanting to have learners use some external resources and do some other activities, we do have some videos that might be helpful for staff on how to implement that, and we're also available to meet one-on-one to talk through that. We've also been doing some cross trainings across the Commonwealth on how partners can work together better, again, to provide some of these additional opportunities for learners that complement what you're doing in the classroom but occur outside of the classroom. Last slide, please. So we do have these slides available and everything's hyperlinked there again. So as we're talking about, ONET, different resources on the PAIR website, how to make referrals, all those hyperlinks are there. If you have any difficulties accessing these different materials, please reach out to us. Really important to maybe take some time to share this with all of your staff and be clear about which staff do what and how this works together to support the learner. Another thing that we'll mention on here is career pathway mapping. We have sample career pathway maps. We also have blank career pathway maps, and those can also be helpful in filling them out and using some transferable skills, but also for learners to goal set and see what the future holds for them and what the possibilities might be. And one more slide. So just wanted to point out that we have already been supporting some programs around the transferable skills. So we've worked with Literacy Pittsburgh, United Neighborhood Centers, and Delaware County Literacy Council on customized PD. So we do have the Introduction to Workforce Preparation Skills on-demand course in the PD portal for anyone to take. But those agencies worked with us and the Digital Literacy and Distance Education Project to do a customized version, and we offered support within their PLCs with that. And then Literacy Pittsburgh, Reading Area Community College, the Literacy Council of Reading Berks, Tri-County OIC, Keystone Opportunity Center, and Delaware County Literacy Council, we supported them in looking at their curriculum and lesson plans. So again, we are available to support with that. We also have tried to make sure every program has posters with the skills to put in their classrooms. We still have posters, so if you need more or you didn't receive any, please reach out. We'll make sure that you get posters for your classrooms. We've also encouraged programs that are in Pennsylvania CareerLink locations to have the posters there as well. And then we have gone out to some programs. So for example, with Reading Area Community College, we went out and modeled using the transferable skills self-reflection with adult learners for their staff to kind of guide them in some best practices and talk through best ways to use those resources with different levels of students and what kind of supports might be needed. And also, do you want to do that through a digital Google form? Do you want to do it paper and pencil? How do you want to collect the information? So again, we're able to do customized technical assistance with that. And then finally, when you're thinking about the transferable skills and workforce preparation skills in general, they are part of IET, Integrated Education and Training. So do want to give a shout out to Lehigh Carbon Community College, Northampton Community College, and IU13, and the work that we did with the statewide CDL IET. So if anyone is new or curious about IET, there is one statewide approved IET for CDL. We also have some new IET videos that are going to be out soon, and the IET course that goes with those videos will be on demand. In the meantime, you can reach out to me for individual support with IET as well. So just again, want to thank Amanda for giving us the opportunity to share some of the tools and resources that are available. And we hope that we have opportunities to work with more programs this year to use some of these tools and resources.
And related to IET, Chrissy and Ann in my office worked together. The IET proposal and planning tool has been updated. They did a great job of, I think, streamlining things and hopefully making things more user-friendly, and that is now available actually on the PDE website, not on PAIR, because that's kind of an official document. And here's the contact information for Loretta and Chrissy. Okay. And I want to actually. So just as a reminder for everyone, this is the PAIR, the Pennsylvania Adult Education Resources webpage. Can I get a thumbs up or something if everyone can see the PAIR website and can hear me okay? Or have one of my staff let me know. Okay.
Yes.
Looks good. Okay, thank you. So here we go. PA Foundation Skills is what Chrissy was talking about. So there's just lots, and there's all of this information, lots of resources associated with it, lots and lots of information available there on the PA Foundation Skills website. Okay, so there was a lot of focus there on what we can do to support the employment outcome. But of course, we all know we're education programs, so the measurable skill gain target is the other target that we are now being, quote unquote, assessed on, and we are being held accountable for. And so I just wanted to, this is a reminder, right? I've talked about this many, many times. Just a reminder for everyone about the different ways that a student can show measurable skill gain. I don't have it on the slide here, but I do want to remind you that for federal reporting purposes, students have to have outcomes for each of their periods of participation. So if you have a student who comes in, maybe they started in April, you rolled them over, they stayed in class until October, and then they leave. Maybe they got a temporary job for the season, they leave your program and they come back in March, and then they reach participant status again. They are going to have 2 periods of participation, and they're going to have to show measurable skill gain and employment outcomes for each of those periods of participation. If you have a student who has 3 periods of participation, they will have to show outcomes for each of those 3. So that's just a reminder. At this point, when we do agency performance, we are not imposing periods of participation, but as a state, we do have to report outcomes for each period of participation. So, measurable skill gain. This slide shows the various ways that a student can show measurable skill gain for any participant, right? This would be your participants in the programming that is standard that you provide, right? It could be your high school equivalency preparation, ESL classes, low-level adult basic education, math, reading, writing, all of those kind of things. So any student who is a participant in our program can demonstrate measurable skill gain in one of these ways. One is through educational functioning level gain. And I'm sorry, I actually have must happen during program year next to EFL gain. It's actually measurable skill gain overall has to happen within the program year or within the period of participation. Sorry, within the program year is what I mean. So any student can show either an EFL gain or they can show a measurable skill gain by attaining the high school equivalency credential, i.e. passing either the high set or the GED or the combination, which we allow in Pennsylvania. There are multiple ways that a student can show an educational functioning level gain. The one that you're all familiar with because we've been doing it for a very, very long time is showing an educational gain based on pre and post testing, right? So they have a matching pair of, TABE math, TABE math, TABE reading, CASAS reading goals, CASAS reading goals. CASAS math goals 2, CASAS math goals 2, and alternate forms, right? And showing an educational functioning level gain based on a pair. One change that happened with WIOA, and it was something we implemented for our programs a couple of years ago, and I think I need to remind everyone of this because I understand that changing the mindset is hard after we've hammered things into your brain for a long time, and then all of a sudden it changes. So in eData, when you enter or roll over an assessment that is going to count as an administration 1 of an assessment, eData automatically looks at the assessment that places the student at the lowest educational functioning level. So even if you give a student, say, both a math and a reading score, that's fine. You can enter both of them in the system. The system, eData, will look and say, oh, wait, okay, the student placed at ABE level 2 on reading and ABE level 3 on math. So the student's entry level is going to show up as ABE level 2. We have to, for federal reporting purposes, we have to establish a policy that places them at an entry level. So that is what we do. That's what eData is built to do. However, under WIOA, as a state, we are allowed to report an EFL gain for either of those two tests at any point over the course of the year. So, and we are now doing that for agency performance as well. So let's say you have a student who comes in, you assess them with reading and math, and they place at ABE level 2 on reading and ABE level 3 on math. So in eData, they are going to be assigned to an entry level of ABE level 2. Let's say they attend classes, they're working on both reading and math. After a sufficient amount of time, and the teacher feels like they've shown progress, you post-test the student. You choose to post-test the student, both reading and math. Let's say the student post-tests or the administration 2 on reading, they're still in ABE level 2, right? They have not shown an EFL gain. On the math, however, they went from ABE level 3 to ABE level 4. That is an EFL gain, right? Even though it didn't happen on the assessment that was used to place them in their entry level, they did show an EFL gain based on pre-post testing on a valid pair of tests, math to math, and they showed a gain. So that counts as an EFL gain. So that student has a measurable skill gain for that period of participation. Okay, so that's one thing to remember. Hi, we've got somebody who needs to mute themselves. Then, and it is not incorrect that I have 1A, 1C, and 1D. Those are the ways Octave defines them. And 1B at the federal level is showing EFL gain through Carnegie units, which we do not use. So that is why 1B is not on the slide. Another way for a student to show an EFL gain and thereby have a measurable skill gain is by enrolling in post-secondary education or training after starting adult education, but within the program year, right? So before June 30th. They do not have to exit adult education before enrolling in post-secondary education, but the enrollment in post-secondary education has to occur after they started adult education, right? So if you have a student who's taking some classes at a community college and then they come to adult education because they want to work on something to support their ability to take another type of class, when they take that other type of class at the post-secondary level, that is not a measurable skill gain because they were already participating in post-secondary before they started adult education. But if you have a situation, where somebody indicates that they're interested in going on to post-secondary, but they want a little bit of a refresher before they take a placement course, or, they were supposed to be able to do training with Title I funds, but they didn't score well enough on math, so they were referred to you, and then they went into that post-secondary training, but they want to continue in your program, that would count as a measurable skill gain, as long as you have documentation of it and submit it to us, or it shows up in the National Student Clearinghouse. But enrolling in post-secondary education or training after starting adult education is considered an EFL gain that demonstrates measurable skill gain. And then the last way that a student can show an EFL gain is by passing a high school equivalency subtest, again, after starting adult education. And I think many of you were thrilled to have that pop up. A reminder related to EFL gain. Before these other options for EFL gain were introduced, when the only way, and this was a while ago, so those of you who are like me and have been around for a long time, under WIA, the only way a student could show an EFL gain was by pre-post testing. And ABE level 6 cannot show an EFL gain based on pre-post testing, right? So a student whose entry level is ABE level 6 cannot show an EFL gain based on pre-post testing. So those individuals used to be excluded from the EFL gain cohort because they couldn't show it. But they do now have to show measurable skill gain. They're included in the cohort for it. So for those individuals, you can't get a measurable skill gain through EFL gain pre-post testing, but that student might be interested in enrolling in post-secondary education or training. They may be working towards their high school equivalency and are either going to pass a subtest or they may actually earn the credential. So if you have students who are ABE level 6, who are kind of your short-term students, and they're working towards either enrolling in post-secondary education or training or passing the high school equivalency test, there may not be a reason to post-test them. Right now, if the teacher would like to use the assessment as information on where the student still needs to work on things as a post-test, that's fine. But you may have a student who came in, the only thing they need to do is pass the math. They actually placed at ABE level 6 on the math. They need a little bit of remediation in order to pass that test, the high school equivalency test. Maybe just passing that test and earning the credential is the way that they're going to show the measurable skill gain. You don't necessarily need to post-test that person with another TABE math or whatever you use to pre-test them. You still need to have one of our assessments as a pre-test to establish the entry level. But for certain students, if they show a measurable skill gain by passing a high school equivalency subtest, there may not be a reason to then turn around and post-test them, right? You're not getting credit just for having a pair of pre and post tests. Like, we don't reward you for that. If you pre and post test them, when the point is either one, to inform instruction, which you should be using, and then hopefully they've shown an EFL gain. And ABE level 6 students cannot show an EFL gain based on a post test. Hope that's clear. But they can attain the high school equivalency credential or pass the a subtest. Maybe they came in and they're working both on their writing and math, and they pass one of the two, and then they continue next year to do another one. They've shown a measurable skill gain by passing one of those subtests. What that also means is if you have someone come into your program who you assess and their lowest level is ABE level 6, and they already have a high school diploma or its equivalent, and they are not interested in enrolling in post-secondary education or training, then there might be some questions about why they're participating in your program, right? You might have to have conversations with them about what they expect to get out of your program and what their ultimate goal is. It may be employment, in which case there might be reasons to serve them, but it will be harder for them to show any kind of measurable skill gain. So, one of the ways to show an EFL gain is by enrolling in post-secondary education or training after starting adult education. There are two ways that we at the state can potentially know whether or not a student has actually transitioned or enrolled in post-secondary education or training. One is by doing a data match with the National Student Clearinghouse. However, that can only happen like once a year. And two, not all post-secondary education, or especially not all training entities, report enrollment to the National Student Clearinghouse. And so if they're not at the national, and also there's a delay in time between when the student enrolls and when it gets reported to the National Student Clearinghouse. So there is another way that you as a local program can document enrollment in post-secondary education or training, and then submit to us the evidence, which is the adult post-secondary enrollment verification form. Couple of requests around that is, if it is a current year student, please use the current year's form. We have gotten some that are forms from 2 or 3 years ago. And we ask that you use the current year form because there have been a few changes to it. Now, you may have a student who attended 2 years ago and you recently found out that they enrolled in post-secondary education or training, and you want to document that and submit it to us. That's fine. You're going to have to use a prior year form because that was when the student was enrolled. But if you're using the post-secondary enrollment for measurable skill gain, it has to happen in the current year, the current program year. So please use the current year form. There are 2 places to get the form. One is in one of our policies, and I'm not remembering it off the top of my head. I think it's C-135, but I'm not 100% sure. Maybe C-130. And then, but you can also create a form and print it out from eData. And when you do it from eData, the system automatically puts in the student PA Secure ID, student PK, and the student's name and some other key information. We prefer that you do that because one, that ensures that it's the correct information, and two, it is a lot easier for my staff to read because we have to put that information into a spreadsheet for data matching purposes. And sometimes it's hard to read the handwriting. And we don't necessarily get the numbers or the names correct. So we do prefer that you use the form from eData, but there also is a form connected to one. Thank you, to C-135. You can submit the post-secondary enrollment forms throughout the year. That is preferable than collecting all of them and sending them in at one time. The advisors have to take time. Well, it's a couple of steps. One, our administrative support, she has to download them, save them, put all the information into a spreadsheet. The advisors then have to review them, determine whether or not we're going to accept it. And a lot of steps involved in getting it done. And so having them throughout the year kind of levels out the amount of work rather than getting, say, 100 of them in June. So please submit them throughout the year. We understand, students often enroll in kind of cohorts of individuals. So you might have 20 or 30 who enroll in a particular post-secondary program at a particular time. That's fine, but please submit them throughout the year. They're being submitted electronically. You do need to keep the documentation locally. Please, if at all possible, when you scan the document, please put your agency name in the file name before you email it to us. We have a folder with a whole lot of documents called like Scan Document 1, Scan Document 250, things like that. And it would help if you had your agency name on it. And as a reminder, for measurable skill gain, enrollment in post-secondary education must happen by June 30th in order to be reported as measurable skill gain. And we would need the forms by mid-August because of how we have to do the data matching, and we report measurable skill gain. Our reporting is due October 1st. So if you want to use post-secondary enrollment forms for MSG, the enrollment must be by June 30th, and we need those forms by mid-August. Okay. A little more quickly, because there are not many programs who do this. There are special measurable skill gain options for students who are participating in IET and workplace literacy classes. As a reminder, workplace literacy class is a class that happens at an employer, in which the curriculum is designed specifically to support either incoming or incumbent workers to succeed in employment at that agency. It includes an on-site analysis of the job tasks, and then the instruction is contextualized around those job tasks. In that type of class, the employer establishes milestones before class starts. The employer establishes milestones, and then there's assessment of achievement of those milestones by the employer or training provider, who can say, yes, based on the instruction, this student has shown progress and has met these milestones. That is not something the adult ed program can establish. It's not something the teacher can determine after the fact, or the employer after the fact can say, oh yeah, they did okay. It has to be done ahead of time. Don't think we have many programs doing that. IETs can also show MSG through, again, a pre-established milestones or by passing an occupational exam. For people using these measurable skill gains, keep in mind that there are special program types that you have to use for those classes in eData. If the class does not have this special program type, it is not that type of class. It will not be pulled for data purposes, and so MSG types 4 and 5 will not be valid. And then you have to document the measurable skill gain in eData in this IET/WPL/PS credential outcomes tab, and you must maintain the evidence locally in the student file. Quick reminder, policy G100, the Adult Education and Workforce Development System, that is the policy by which the Department of Education division delegates the roles and responsibilities of one-stop partners to our grantees that get federal funds. And there have been some questions about how sub-grantees have to be involved. And so the policy says that all grantees must be partners in the PA Career Link. Do want to say that for the purposes of this policy, the grantee is a consortium. So if there's a main grantee with sub-grantees, that consortium of agency is the grantee. And that consortium can work together to determine which entities within the consortium participate and who meets what roles and responsibilities, right? So there may be some small programs that provide very targeted services, and having that partner actively involved in the local PA Career Link may not make sense. And if they're a sub-grantee and part of a consortium, the consortium can make that decision. But that consortium somehow or another has to work on meeting the roles and responsibilities. And then I would also recommend you just go to the website and review the policy as a whole, because there's a lot of other information in there. Okay, I'll try to be quick. Data awareness campaign reminders. We're working on this year because we've got these targets that we have to meet. And so, the idea is we're supporting you to begin looking at your data, so that moving forward, you can have you can use your data as it relates to measurable skill gains and employments to inform your activities. So we have this campaign. All recipients of division grant funds must participate. This includes sub-grantees. Your consortium can determine if the sub-grantees want to do independently on their own, or if you're going to do it as a consortium. That's up to you. You do have to have a program administrator in the leadership role, who is going to be the person who makes sure all staff at the agency understand how to use data. Your data quality specialist should be involved in the data awareness campaign, including the webinars. And then you may have one additional person if you want, but that's not required. If you want to have more people, you'll have to talk to Anne, whose email address was included in the email from 11/14 that has all this information. And we do request that your agencies register by December 1st. Quick DiplomaSender update. This will impact students who are using online proctoring. Little bit of context, there has been fraud. We have had situations where students who are not Pennsylvania residents are claiming Pennsylvania residency when they register for GED or HiSET. They are saying they have a Pennsylvania address when they in fact do not, and then they're taking advantage of the free testing. And then when they pass, they get really upset when we won't issue them a credential. So DiplomaSender has implemented a process whereby test takers who pass the high school equivalency test using online proctoring will need to provide documentation of PA residency before they get the credential. The documentation they're looking for can be a valid driver's license, state photo ID, or if the person does not have that, if they have like a recent utility bill, a pay stub, or a credit card statement with the test taker's name and address, they can submit that. They check it regularly. As long as the person has some kind of valid documentation, it shouldn't be a problem. As soon as they confirm Pennsylvania residency, they can get their credentials. But I did want to I know some of you have students who like come into your programs and take it using online proctoring from one of your computers, or they may be doing it at home. So that will be an additional step in order to discourage some of the fraud that is happening. And finally, sorry, I'm going over. I know I talked about this last month. There's a lot in the news about the SNAP. So SNAP payments are going out again now that the federal shutdown has ended. But the bill that was passed back in the summer has implemented work requirements for more people. Well, it's implemented work requirements that weren't there previously. It includes, let's see, many SNAP recipients will be subject to these work requirements, and it will be that they have to be involved in working, volunteering, or participating in an education or training program for at least 20 hours a week or 80 hours each month, and they will have to report that they are meeting these work requirements. It's my understanding that each state will be determining what they consider to be meeting work requirements, like what activities can count towards work requirements. And they still have to determine how the SNAP recipients will report that to them. If you have students who are asking questions, they should talk to their local county assistance office. I do want to let you know that at this point, it is not clear whether or not participation in adult basic education programming will count. I have reached out to multiple people to say I think it's really, really important that a participation in adult education count towards the 20 hours, because many of our students are also SNAP recipients, and it would be detrimental to them if, in order to continue receiving this financial support to feed their families, if they then had to stop attending adult education, because that would prevent them from progressing as they are hoping to do. But I can't promise anything. And that is it. So if there are any questions, you can unmute yourself or put them in the chat. If not, thank you all very much for your time. I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving with friends or family, or by yourself if that's how you prefer to do it. And we will talk to you next month.